My name is Madison and I am 29. They say that twins share a bond that transcends the physical world, a connection woven into the very fabric of our DNA. For most of my life, I believed that my sister, Chloe, was my shadow, my confidant, and the person who knew the rhythm of my heart better than anyone else. We shared everything from childhood toys to the secret languages of our teenagers. But there's one thing I never expected to share with her: the man I loved and the child I had prayed for through years of clinical silence and heartbreak. My husband, Elias, and I had been trying to conceive for 5 grueling years. Our journey was a repetitive cycle of hope and mourning. Every negative test felt like a small funeral, and every doctor visit was a reminder of my body's perceived failure. We had tried everything: hormone injections that left me bruised and moody, intrauterine insemination that felt cold and mechanical, and 3 rounds of IVF that drained our savings and my spirit. By the time we reached our late 20s, the doctors told us the truth I wasn't ready to hear. My uterus was a hostile environment for a growing life. If we wanted a biological child, we needed a surrogate. The search for a surrogate is a daunting, expensive, and deeply impersonal process. We looked at agencies and profiles of strangers, but nothing felt right. That was when Chloe stepped in. We were sitting in my kitchen, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the table as I cried over another set of legal documents. Chloe reached across the table, took my hands in hers, and looked me in the eyes with a clarity that felt like a lifeline. She told me she couldn't stand to see me break anymore. She said that since we were identical twins, her body was practically mine anyway. She offered to carry our child, to be the vessel for the family Elias and I had dreamed of building. It felt like a miracle. It felt like the ultimate act of sisterly love. The first few months were a whirlwind of medical appointments and cautious optimism. Because we were identical twins, the doctors explained that the genetic connection was unique. The embryo was created using my egg and Elias's sperm, but the environment Chloe provided would be as close to my own as biologically possible. We were ecstatic. Elias treated Chloe like she was made of fine glass. He was at every appointment, rubbing her feet when they swelled, and bringing her specific cravings at 3 in the morning. I was grateful. I was so incredibly grateful that I didn't see the shifts in the atmosphere. I didn't notice the way their conversations lingered a second too long, or how Elias began to look at Chloe not with the gratitude of a brother-in-law, but with the longing of a man falling in love. I remember the exact moment the floor fell out from under me. Chloe was 6 months pregnant, her belly around, from testament to our shared hope. We were having dinner at their favorite Italian spot. I had gone to the restroom, and when I returned, I saw Elias leaning over the table, whispering something into Chloe's ear that made her blush a deep crimson red. It wasn't the blush of a sister. It was the blush of a woman being pursued. When they saw me, they pulled apart quickly, their eyes darting to their plates. The air in the room became heavy, thick with a secret I wasn't supposed to know yet. A week later, I came home from work to find Elias standing in the middle of our living room with 2 suitcases packed. The house was silent, devoid of the music or television noise that usually filled our evenings. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, his voice trembling but certain. He told me that he was leaving. He told me that through the process of the pregnancy, he had realized that he couldn't be with me anymore. He said that watching Chloe carry his child had awakened something in him that I could never satisfy. Then he said the words that shattered my soul into 1,000 jagged pieces. The baby needs its biological mother, Madison. And in this moment, in this reality, that person is Chloe. I stood there, frozen. The absurdity of this statement was a physical blow. It is my egg, Elias, I whispered. My voice was a ghost of itself. It is my DNA. She is just the carrier. But he shook his head, finally meeting my gaze with a coldness I didn't recognize. He said that biology wasn't just about a lab dish. It was about the blood and the heartbeat and the 9 months of connection. He claimed that Chloe was the one providing the life force, and therefore, She was the true mother. He told me they had already rented an apartment together. They were starting a life. They were becoming the family I was supposed to be a part of. The betrayal was twofold. A jagged blade that cut from both sides. My husband and my twin sister had conspired to erase me from my own miracle. Chloe wouldn't even take my calls. When she finally sent a text, it was brief and devoid of the warmth we had shared for 29 years. She said she was sorry, but that she couldn't deny the feelings that had blossomed. She said she felt more connected to this baby than she ever thought possible, and that she and Elias were meant to be together. She asked me not to make it difficult. She asked me for a divorce so they could marry before the birth. Most people in my position would have screamed. They would have hired the most aggressive lawyers in the state, sued for custody, and fought a war in the town square. My parents were horrified, caught in a nightmarish tug-of-war between their two daughters, eventually retreating into a neutral silence that felt like another abandonment. But as I sat in our empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life Elias had discarded like trash, a strange, icy calm settled over me. I realized that if I fought them now, they would be prepared. They expected me to be the hysterical, jilted wife. They expected me to beg for my child and my husband. I decided right then that I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of my desperation. I didn't argue when the divorce papers arrived. I didn't contest the lopsided division of assets Elias proposed. I signed everything with a steady hand. I even sent a bouquet of flowers to their new apartment with a note that simply said, "I understand now. I want you both to be happy." They fell for it. They believed that I had been broken so completely that my spirit was extinguished. They viewed my compliance as weakness, a sign that I had accepted my role as the forgotten third wheel in their new romance. Elias even started calling me again, his voice filled with a patronizing pity, thanking me for being so mature. He told me they wanted me to be involved in the baby's life, perhaps as a doting aunt. Once they were settled, I agreed to everything. I played the part of the grieving, but accepting sister to perfection. But beneath the calm exterior, I was moving pieces on a chessboard they didn't even know existed. I knew things about our family history, about the legalities of our surrogacy contract, and about the medical reality of our situation that they had conveniently forgotten in their haze of infatuation. I knew that they were building their entire future on a foundation of lies and theft, and I knew that the higher they built their dream, the harder it would fall. I spent my days working and my nights planning. I met with a different kind of lawyer, one who specialized in the intricacies of reproductive law and the specific language of the contracts we had signed before the first embryo transfer. I visited the clinic where our embryos were stored, speaking quietly with the coordinators I had known for years. I gathered every scrap of paper, every medical record, and every recorded conversation. I wasn't just waiting for the baby to be born. I was waiting for the moment of maximum impact. Chloe's pregnancy progressed, and she began posting pictures online. Photos of Elias cradling her bump. Photos of the nursery they had painted a soft, serene blue. They looked like the perfect couple, the protagonists of a modern romance. The comments were filled with friends who didn't know the whole truth, praising them for their courage and their love. I liked every single photo. I commented with heart emojis. I was the ghost in their machine, invisible but ever-present. As the 9th month approached, the tension in my chest became a coiled spring. They invited me to the final ultrasound, a gesture of healing, as Elias put it. I sat in the darkened room, listening to the rhythmic gallop of the baby's heart, watching the grainy image on the screen. Chloe held Elias's hand, and he kissed her forehead. They looked at me with smug sympathy. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken my life and improved upon it. They had no idea that I was counting down the seconds until the birth, not because I wanted to hold the child, but because I wanted to watch their world shatter. The delivery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, a planned induction. Elias texted me the night before, telling me he was nervous, but excited. He told me he hoped we could put the past behind us for the sake of the child. I replied that I couldn't agree more and that tomorrow would be a day none of us would ever forget. I was right. The stage was set. The players were in place. And the secret I had been guarding was about to be unleashed. They wanted a biological mother. They wanted a family built on betrayal. I was about to give them exactly what they deserved. But it wouldn't be the happy ending they had scripted. It would be the beginning of a reckoning that would leave them with nothing but the ashes of their own greed. The morning of the induction arrived with a cold and clinical grayness that matched the resolve hardening in my chest. I dressed carefully, a sharp-tailored suit of deep navy blue, a stark contrast to the soft-flowing maternity, where Chloe had been sporting for months. I didn't want to look like a victim or a grieving sister. I wanted to look like the woman who held the keys to the kingdom they were trying to inhabit. When I arrived at the hospital, the scent of antiseptic and floor wax hit me, a familiar smell from the years of failed fertility treatments. But this time it didn't trigger the usual wave of nausea or despair. This time it felt like the smell of a battlefield before the first strike. I found Elias in the waiting area of the maternity ward, pacing back and forth with a jittery energy. He looked exhausted, but wore a triumphant smile that twisted my stomach. When he saw me, he actually had the audacity to wrap me in a hug. He smelled of the expensive espresso I used by him and the woodsy aftershave he only wore for special occasions. He whispered that he was glad I was there and that he knew this was hard for me, but it was the right thing for the baby. I patted his back with a robotic precision, feeling the heat of my own fury beneath my skin, and told him that everything was exactly as it should be. Chloe was already in the labor and delivery room, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a rhythmic, taunting cadence. She looked pale and small in the oversized hospital gown, the bravado she had shown in her social media posts replaced by the raw, primal fear of impending labor. When she saw me enter, her grip on the Betrayal tightened. We hadn't been in a room alone together since she had officially moved in with Elias. There was a moment of profound silence where our eyes locked, and for a second, I saw the twin I grew up with, the girl who shared my bed when it thundered, and the girl who promised we would never let anything come between us. But then I looked at her hand, where a new diamond sparkled, a ring Elias had bought with the money we had saved for our joint future, and the sisterly connection snapped for good. The hours that followed were a grueling display of Elias's devotion to her. He was the perfect birth partner, breathing with her, wiping her brow with cool cloths, and whispering endearments that were once reserved only for me. Every time he called her my love or my brave girl, it felt like a deliberate lash across my face. I sat in the corner chair, a silent observer, scrolling through my phone, while actually reviewing the digital copies of the documents my new legal team had finalized the night before. I was the picture of the supportive, detached relative, but I was actually monitoring the clock. I knew the hospital's protocol for birth certificate registration and the timing of the pediatric release forms. As the labor intensified, the room became a chaotic swirl of nurses and medical equipment. The doctor, a woman who had seen us through the initial stages of the surrogacy, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. She knew the original plan. She knew that I was supposed to be the one on that bed, or at the very least, the one holding the child first. I gave her a small, tight smile that signaled I didn't want to discuss it. The betrayal was public knowledge in our small social circle now, and the whispers followed me like a shadow. Then came the final push. The atmosphere in the room shifted from clinical to intense. Elias was positioned at the head of the bed, his face wet with tears of anticipation. He was ready to claim his prize, the physical manifestation of his new life. When the baby finally arrived, a robust and screaming boy, the room erupted into the usual celebratory cheers. The nurses cleaned him quickly and placed him on Chloe's chest. The sight of my sister holding the child created from my own egg, with my husband sobbing at her side, should have broken me. It should have been the moment I collapsed, but instead, I felt a surge of cold, calculating energy. the nurse approached with the paperwork for the birth registry. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they would officially name him and link their names together as his parents on a legal document. Elias reached for the pen, his hand shaking with emotion. He looked at Chloe, and they shared a look of pure, unadulterated victory. They had done it. They had bypassed the messy emotions and the legal hurdles and simply taken what they wanted. Or so they thought. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the sentimental fog of the room like a blade. The doctor and the nurses stopped. Elias looked up, his expression shifting from joy to irritation. "Madison, not now," he snapped. "We are trying to have a moment." I stood up and walked toward the bed, pulling a folder from my bag. "I am afraid the paperwork won't be that simple. Elias, you see, while you two were busy playing house and planning your nursery, I was busy reading the fine print of the surrogacy agreement we all signed." Chloe looked up from the baby, her face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. I pulled out the primary contract, the one Chloe had signed when she was still my loving sister and Elias was still my loyal husband. I pointed to a specific clause that had been drafted by a very thorough lawyer I had hired long ago, back when I was still paranoid about the legalities of a third-party carry. The clause stated that in the event of a marital separation or a breach of the surrogacy terms by the surrogate, the legal parental rights would immediately and irrevocably revert to the biological mother, me, and the designated guardian of my choosing. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for the medical staff to hear. I reminded them of the moral turpitude clause. Chloe had signed an affidavit stating she would not engage in any behavior that would jeopardize the stability of the intended parent's home by entering into a romantic relationship with the intended father and causing the dissolution of the marriage. She had breached the contract before the second trimester was even over. Elias let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You think a piece of paper matters right now? I'm the father, Madison. She's the mother. We are a family. No court is going to take a baby away from its parents because of a technicality." I smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, Elias, it's not just a technicality, and she isn't the legal mother. According to the pre-birth order we filed months ago, which was never rescinded because you were too distracted to check, I am the mother listed on the records. And as for you, you might be the biological father, but you are currently in breach of the financial and custodial arrangements of our divorce settlement." The room went deathly silent. The nurses looked at each other, unsure of whether to continue with the medical charting. I stepped closer to the bed, looking down at the baby. He was beautiful. He had my nose and Elias's chin, but he wasn't a symbol of love to them anymore. He was about to become a symbol of their ruin. I looked at Chloe, who was clutching the baby as if I were going to snatch him right then and there. "I don't want the baby, Chloe," I said quietly, loud enough only for the three of us to hear. Their faces registered a flicker of confusion. "You don't want him?" Elias asked, his voice cracking. "After everything?" "No," I replied. "I spent 5 years wanting a child to complete a family built on trust. This child was born out of lies. I don't want a daily reminder of your infidelity in my house. But I also don't want you to have the life you stole from me. You see, while you were expecting me to fight for custody, I was working on something else." I pulled out a second set of documents. These were the ones I had been working on with my new legal team. Since Chloe breached the contract, she is legally liable for the entirety of the medical costs, the surrogacy fees, and a massive penalty for the breach of the gestational agreement. It's a debt that totals nearly $500,000. And since Elias co-signed as the intended parent who is now in a domestic partnership with the surrogate, the debt falls on both of you. But that's not all, I added, watching the panic begin to set in on Elias's face. "I've also filed for a full audit of the business accounts. I know you've been funneling money into your new life with Chloe using our joint business assets. That's embezzlement, Elias. I have the bank statements. I have the wire transfers. I have everything." Elias stood up, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. "You're insane. You're going to ruin us over a baby you don't even want." I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not ruining you, Elias. You ruined yourselves the moment you decided that my sister's womb was a shortcut to a life without me. I am simply holding you accountable to the laws you thought you were above." The doctor stepped forward, trying to intercede, but I held up a hand. "We are finished here for now. The hospital will keep the baby in the nursery under a legal hold until the court determines the final placement based on the contract breach. You won't be taking him home today, and you won't be taking him home tomorrow." Chloe began to sob, a high-pitched, wailing sound that filled the room. Elias tried to reach for her, but a security guard, who I had alerted earlier about a potential dispute over the birth, stepped into the doorway. I picked up my bag and straightened my jacket. I walked toward the door, but before I left, I turned back one last time. "Enjoy the baby while you can," I said softly, "because by the time the lawyers and the forensic accountants are done with you, you won't have a house to take him to, a car to drive him in, or a cent to buy his formula. You wanted the biological mother, Elias. Well, here she is, and she's a lot more expensive than you ever imagined." I walked out of the room, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. I didn't look back at the crying woman or the broken man. I had spent years being the one who cried, the one who was broken, the one who begged for a crumb of happiness. Now it was their turn. The shock of the delivery room was only the beginning. I had a long road ahead of me to dismantle the rest of their lives, and I intended to enjoy every single mile of it. The aftermath of the hospital confrontation felt like the first breath of crisp air after being submerged in stagnant water for years. As I walked through the sliding glass doors of the medical center, leaving behind the echoes of Chloe's screams and Elias's frantic demands, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Most people would expect me to feel a void, considering I had just walked away from a child that carried my genetic code. But that baby was no longer a symbol of hope. He had been weaponized against me, used as a pawn in a game of emotional chess that my own sister and husband thought they had already won. They didn't realize that in their quest to take everything from me, they had handed me the power to destroy them. The next few weeks were a calculated storm. I didn't return to the house we had once shared. I moved into a high-rise apartment downtown, a place of glass and steel that felt as cold and impenetrable as my heart had become. From there, I coordinated with my legal team, led by a woman named Eleanor, who was known in the city as a shark in silk. Eleanor didn't care about the sentimentality of the twin bond or the tragedy of infertility. She cared about the ironclad nature of contracts and the cold reality of financial malfeasance. We sat in her office for hours, surrounded by stacks of paper that documented the slow, systematic dismantling of my life. "Madison," Eleanor said one morning, tapping a pen against a ledger, "we have found something much deeper than just the breach of the surrogacy agreement. While your husband was preparing to leave you for your sister, he wasn't just moving his clothes. He was moving equity." Elias had been the primary manager of our joint investment portfolio, a collection of real estate and stocks we had built together over a decade. It turned out he had been liquidating assets and moving them into a shell company registered in Chloe's name. He thought he was being clever, hiding the money in a place I wouldn't look because I would be too distracted by the baby. I leaned back in the leather chair, a slow heat rising in my chest. "So he wasn't just leaving me for love," I said. "He was leaving me for a lifestyle he didn't want to pay for in a divorce." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. But because he used Chloe's name as the sole officer of that corporation, she is now legally on the hook for tax evasion and fraudulent transfer of assets. He tried to protect the money by giving it to her, but all he did was tie a noose around both of their necks. While the financial investigation deepened, the battle for the baby took a turn that neither of them expected. Because of the legal hold I had placed at the hospital, the child remained in the care of the state in a transitional nursery. Elias and Chloe were allowed supervised visits, but they couldn't take him home. They were living in their rented apartment, surrounded by baby gear they couldn't use, while their bank accounts were being frozen one by one. Every time they tried to use a credit card for diapers or supplies, it was declined. I wanted them to feel the desperation I had felt when I was begging for another round of IVF. The feeling of your future being held hostage by something out of your control. I received a frantic call from Chloe 3 weeks after the birth. Her voice was unrecognizable, thin, wavering, and stripped of the smugness she had displayed throughout her pregnancy. "Madison, please," she sobbed into the phone. "The state is threatening to put the baby in foster care because of the legal dispute. You can't let this happen. He's your nephew. He's your blood." I listened to her breathe for a moment, savoring the sound of her panic. "Funny," I replied, my voice as smooth as glass. "I remember you saying he was your baby because you carried him. I remember you saying the biological mother didn't matter. Now that the bills are coming due and the law is knocking on your door, you want me to remember our blood." She started to plead, telling me that Elias was losing his mind, that the stress was ruining their relationship. She told me they were fighting every day, that the romance they thought would be a fairy tale was turning into a nightmare of legal fees and accusations. I told her that I would consider dropping the legal hold on the baby under one condition. She had to give me a full, sworn statement about when their affair actually began. I knew the truth, but I wanted it on the record, signed and notarized. I wanted the proof that they had been planning this betrayal long before the surrogacy even started. A few days later, the document arrived. It was even worse than I imagined. They hadn't just fallen in love during the pregnancy. They had been involved for 2 years. Elias had encouraged me to keep trying for a baby, knowing I would fail, just so we would eventually turn to surrogacy and he could have a child with the woman he actually wanted. He had used my grief and my desperation as a roadmap to get what he wanted. He had let me mourn 3 miscarriages while he was sleeping with my twin sister in the guest room of our own home. Armed with this confession, Eleanor and I went for the jugular. We filed a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, along with the fraud and embezzlement charges. The court date for the preliminary hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I walked into the courtroom and saw them sitting at the defense table. They looked terrible. Chloe's hair was unwashed, and she had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. Elias looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his hands were shaking as he shuffled through his papers. They looked like a couple on the verge of a total breakdown, not a pair of star-crossed lovers. When the judge took the bench, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Elias's lawyer tried to argue that the surrogacy contract was unconscionable and that the interests of the child should override any financial or legal disputes. He painted a picture of a loving father and a devoted mother being persecuted by a vengeful, bitter woman. I sat there, my expression unreadable, watching the judge's face. Then, Eleanor stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "This is not a case of a woman seeking revenge. This is a case of systemic fraud. We have evidence that the defendants conspired to use the plaintiff's biological material and her financial resources to create a life they intended to steal from the very beginning. We have a sworn confession that the affair predates the surrogacy by years. We have proof that Mr. Elias transferred over $400,000 of joint marital assets into a shell company to avoid a fair divorce settlement. This wasn't a family being formed. It was a heist." The judge looked over the documents, her brow furrowing as she read Chloe's confession. She looked at Elias and Chloe with a look of pure disdain. The hearing lasted for 4 hours, and by the end of it, the judge's ruling was a scorched earth policy. She maintained the freeze on all their assets. She ordered an immediate investigation into the shell company. And most importantly, she ruled that until the civil and criminal matters were resolved, neither Elias nor Chloe could be granted legal custody of the child. The baby would remain in a state-approved kinship placement. And since I was the only family member with a clean record and the financial means to provide care, the judge asked if I was willing to take him I looked across the room at Chloe. She was looking at me with a desperate, pleading hope. She thought this was her way out. She thought I would take the baby, let her visit, and eventually things would go back to some version of normal. She thought my maternal instinct would override my anger. She was wrong. I stood up and looked the judge in the eye. "No, Your Honor," I said firmly. "I will not take the child. I have already stated that the breach of contract and the emotional trauma make it impossible for me to provide the environment this child deserves. However, I have a list of vetted, wonderful families who have been waiting for years to adopt. I would like to move for the termination of parental rights based on the fraud and the inability of the biological father to provide a stable home due to his pending criminal charges." The scream that came out of Chloe's throat was something I will never forget. It was the sound of absolute, soul-crushing loss. Elias jumped to his feet, shouting that I couldn't do this, that he was the father. The bailiffs moved in quickly, forcing him back into his seat. The judge hammered her gavel, calling for order. But the damage was done. They realized then that I wasn't just trying to take their money or their dignity. I was taking the one thing they thought was theirs by right. I was taking the future they had built on my broken heart. As I left the courtroom, Elias managed to break away from his lawyer and intercept me in the hallway. "Madison, stop," he yelled. "You're a monster. How can you do this to your own sister? How can you give away your own son?" I stopped and turned to face him. He looked small. He looked insignificant. He looked like the mistake I had spent a decade making. "He isn't my son, Elias," I said quietly. "He was an experiment for you and a paycheck for her. You wanted a biological mother. You wanted the woman who gave him life. Well, she's the one who's going to make sure he grows up far away from people who don't know the meaning of the word loyalty." I walked away, feeling lighter with every step. But the story wasn't over. There was one final piece of the puzzle, a secret that Chloe hadn't even told Elias. A secret I had discovered during the medical audit that was about to be the final nail in their coffin. They thought they had seen the worst of me, but they had no idea that the real shock was yet to come. The weeks following the court hearing were a masterclass in slow-motion destruction. Elias and Chloe were trapped in a legal and financial purgatory of their own making. Without access to the frozen funds and facing mounting legal fees, they were forced to move out of their luxury apartment and into a cramped, one-bedroom motel on the outskirts of the city. The irony was delicious. They had traded a life of security and love for a desperate, frantic existence fueled by mutual resentment. Every time I saw a notification from my legal team, it was another victory, a denied appeal, a new discovery of hidden assets, or a report on their deteriorating mental states. But the final blow was something even I hadn't expected to deliver so soon. It was the piece of information I had stumbled upon while reviewing the exhaustive medical records from the fertility clinic and the birth hospital. During my private audit, I had invited them to my office for a final meeting to discuss a settlement. They arrived looking like ghosts of their former selves. Chloe's skin was sallow, and the vibrant, confident twin I once knew was replaced by a woman who looked 10 years older than 29. Elias sat beside her, but they didn't touch. The air between them was thick with the poison of their shared failure. They thought I was going to offer them a way out, a small sum of money, or a path to see the baby in exchange for dropping the lawsuits. They were still thinking in terms of compromise. They still didn't understand that I was no longer a person who compromised. I sat behind my desk, the sunlight glinting off the glass surface, and pushed a single medical file across to them. "You both should read this," I said. "It's the final report from the pediatric geneticist at the hospital." Chloe reached for it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the technical jargon before she looked up at me, confused. "What is this, Madison? Why does it say the blood type doesn't match the expected profile?" I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands. "You see, during the third round of IVF, when we were so desperate, The clinic made a very specific note about the embryos, but there was also a window of time. According to your own confession, Chloe, where you and Elias were already being intimate behind my back, you were so confident that the baby was the result of our shared genetic experiment. You were so sure that you were carrying my egg and his sperm, but the genetic test conducted after the birth reveals something quite different. Elias grabbed the paper, his face turning a ghostly shade of white as he read the results. The DNA profile confirmed that the child was not a product of the IVF procedure. Somewhere in the overlap of the medical appointments and their illicit affair, Chloe had conceived naturally. But here was the twist that turned their world upside down. The DNA profile of the father didn't match Elias either. The silence in the room was deafening. Elias looked at Chloe, his eyes widening with a realization that was more painful than any legal judgment I could have leveled. You were with someone else, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. Chloe began to shake her head violently, tears streaming down her face. No, Elias, it was only you, I swear. But the paper didn't lie. I had done my homework. I had looked into Chloe's life during the months leading up to the surrogacy. The months she claimed she was preparing her body for my child. She had been seeing an old boyfriend on the side, a man she had turned to when the pressure of the affair with Elias became too much. So, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a guillotine, not only did you betray me, Elias, but you ruined your life, your career, and your reputation for a child that isn't even yours. And Chloe, you spent 9 months pretending to be the ultimate sister, the ultimate mother, and the ultimate partner, all while carrying a lie that was even bigger than the one we were all living. You aren't the biological mother of my child, and he isn't the biological father of yours. The child is currently being processed for adoption by a family that will actually love him. And since neither of you has a biological or legal claim that can stand up in court after this fraud, you have no say in where he goes. Elias lunged across the desk, but I didn't flinch. He was broken. He was a man who had sacrificed everything for a fantasy that had just evaporated. He had lost his wife, his business, his money, and now, the very reason he used to justify his betrayal. He looked at Chloe with a loathing so deep it was visceral. You're a liar, he hissed. You're a disgusting, pathetic liar. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably now, her head in her hands, the weight of her double life finally crushing her. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. The settlement I'm offering is simple, I said. You sign over the remaining rights to the property in the mountains, you agree to a permanent restraining order, and you plead guilty to the financial fraud charges. In exchange, I won't pursue the full civil damages that would keep you in debt for the rest of your lives. You can go off together, or apart, and try to rebuild whatever is left of your miserable existences. But you will never see me again, and you will never see that Chilby signed. They didn't have a choice. They left my office separately. Elias walking out first without even looking back at the woman he had claimed was his soulmate. Chloe lingered for a moment, her eyes red and pleading. Madison, please, she whispered. We're twins. We're the same. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw a stranger. No, Chloe, I said, we were never the same. I knew how to love. You only knew how to take Dot in the months that followed. I watched from a distance as their lives completely unraveled. Elias was eventually barred from the financial industry, his reputation permanently tarnished by the fraud charges. He ended up working a menial job in a city where no one knew his name, living in a studio apartment that cost less than the shoes he used to wear. Chloe disappeared for a while, eventually resurfacing on social media under a different name, trying to sell lifestyle tips to people who had no idea she had destroyed her own family for a lie. They never spoke again. The great love story they thought they were writing ended in a bargain bin tragedy. As for me, I didn't look back. I took the money I recovered from the shell company and the sale of the assets and I started a foundation. It helps women who have been victims of reproductive fraud and provides legal assistance for those navigating the complex world of surrogacy. I found a peace I never thought possible, not because I got everything I wanted, but because I stood my ground and refused to be a footnote in someone else's betrayal. I sometimes think about the baby. I know he is with a family that cherishes him, far away from the toxic web of my former life. I didn't want him, not because he wasn't innocent, but because he deserved a beginning that wasn't tainted by the blood of my enemies. I gave him a chance at a clean slate, and in doing so, I gave myself one to dot. The revenge wasn't just in the money or the legal wins. It was in the moment they realized that they had traded a diamond for a handful of gravel. It was in the realization that while they were trying to play me, I was the one who owned the board. My name is Madison, and I am 29. I am no longer a twin, and I am no longer a wife. I am simply a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please like and comment on how you would have handled such a betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, My Calm Revenge, for more stories where the truth always comes to light and the guilty always pay the price.